I was being myself. That's what made this one so difficult to see. Not performing, not pretending, not consciously assembling a version of myself for public consumption. Just being me, naturally, authentically, the way I always am in social situations, in conversations, in the ordinary daily encounters with other human beings that make up the texture of a shared life. Except my observer self, when it finally stepped forward and looked honestly at what had been happening, it noticed something that stopped me mid-sentence. I had been performing for hours. Not dramatically, not falsely exactly, but performing nonetheless. Managing the impression I was making with a sophistication so complete and so continuous that it had long since stopped feeling like management and started feeling like identity. The costume was so familiar, I had forgotten it was a costume. The skin I was born in, somewhere underneath it, waiting. Here's what my ego self does in social situations. It monitors. Continuously, automatically, without being asked and without taking breaks. How am I coming across? Did that land well? Was that too much? Not enough. Did they understand what I meant, or did they hear something I didn't intend? Should I clarify, or would clarifying make it worse? Am I being interesting? Am I being too interested? Too eager? Not warm enough? Too available? Not available enough? The internal commentary running parallel to the actual conversation. You know it. The ego self watching itself perform while simultaneously performing. The publicist and the performer occupying the same body at the same time with such practiced efficiency that from the outside and almost from the inside, they appear to be one person simply being themselves. Oh, and the stories. The ones I tell about myself that I've told so many times they've stopped feeling like stories. The version of my history that has been edited and refined through years of social performance into something coherent and consistent and carefully shaped to produce a particular impression. Not dishonest exactly, but curated. The highlights selected, the contradictions smoothed, the unresolved comers kept out of the light. My ego's greatest creative achievement? The character of me. And now the theater, because the performance requires an audience, and the audience my ego self has assembled is not empty. That would almost be less unsettling. The theater is sold out, every seat filled, and in every seat, another ego self, also performing, also monitoring, also running its parallel commentary on how it's coming across and whether it's being received correctly, and what the people around it think of the story it's been telling about itself. Oh, an entire theater of simultaneous performances, each one performing for the others, none of them watching. Because watching, genuinely watching, the observer self-present and attending with full, unhurried awareness to what's actually in front of it, watching requires something the ego self cannot provide. That's presence. The white-hot honesty of the present moment. And the present moment is precisely what the ego self cannot handle, not because it is evil, not because it is broken or malicious or the enemy of everything the practice is trying to build, but because the present moment asks the one thing the ego self has spent its entire existence learning to avoid. To be seen. Not the performance, not the character, not the curated story with its selected highlights and smooth contradictions, but the actual person underneath all of it. Unguarded, unedited, uncertain. Alive in the way that only unperformed things are alive. Most of what we call conversation is just two people taking turns being absent in each other's company. I've sat with that sentence for a long time because it describes something I felt in hundreds of conversations without ever having words for it. The exchange technically happening, the words passing between us, the social transaction completed with apparent success, laughter in the right places, agreement where agreement was expected, the comfortable confirmation of each other's existing stories about themselves and the world. And underneath all of it, two people who never quite met. Two ego-selves acknowledging each other's performances without ever reaching the real person giving them. The contact almost made, the almost so convincing that both people walk away feeling that a real conversation happened. Not knowing, or perhaps half knowing, in the place that knows things before the mind admits them, that they are a little more alone than when they arrived. Because the ego self doesn't truly see another ego self. It responds to its perception of them. Its history with similar people in similar situations. Its hopes for what this relationship might provide. Its fears about what genuine contact might reveal. Its projection of its own interior onto the screen of another person's exterior. The other person received not as themselves, complex, contradictory, uncertain, alive, but as a character in the ego self's ongoing story. Useful or threatening, confirming or challenging, safe or unknown, certain or uncertain, processed, filed, responded to accordingly, but not seen, not met. The present moment where genuine meetings live, white hot, unmediated, requiring the costume to come off, sitting in the center of the conversation completely unvisited. Two people taking turns being absent. In a sold-out theater where everyone is mesmerized by their own story. And here is what I need to say about the ego self before I go further. It is not the monster. I want to be clear about this, especially now at the midpoint of this series. After 10 episodes of watching the ego self's tricks and productions and ancient buttons and theatrical revivals, if you've been building a case against your ego self, the prosecution rests. Because the prosecutor is the ego self in a different costume. The ego self performing for the theater doesn't do it from malice, doesn't do it from evil or brokenness or from fundamental wrongness that needs to be corrected or eliminated or transcended. It does it from fear. The performance learned early in a world that was rewarded the curated version and made the unguarded version feel unsafe. That praised the highlights and punished the contradictions. That responded to the costume with acceptance and to the skin with something less reliable. The ego self didn't choose the theater. It chose survival. And the survival strategy, repeated enough times, reinforced enough times, successful enough times at producing the safety and acceptance it was seeking, became the only world it knew. So the costume became the skin. Not because the ego self is stupid or broken, because it is, in its own way, trying to be safe, trying to be loved, trying to navigate a world that has always felt slightly more dangerous than the performance lets on. That trying deserves something other than prosecution. It deserves the same thing the drift always deserves: compassion. The observer self seeing the ego self's performance clearly and choosing not to eliminate it, not to shame it into silliness, but to gently, firmly, with genuine love, step forward and offer the theater something it has never seen from this particular performer, the actual person. My observer self returns to this one in a very specific way, through contact. A moment in the conversation where something real breaks through the performance, where someone says something unguarded, accidentally, spontaneously, without their own ego self's publicist approving it first, And something in me responds not from the performance, but from beneath it. A genuine laugh, an unexpected recognition, a moment of shared uncertainty that neither of us planned and neither of us could have scripted. The performances interrupting themselves, two people accidentally meeting in the gap between their costumes. Oh, that's what this feels like. That's what was possible the entire time. And in that moment, the awareness of how long I was performing before this moment arrived, how much of the conversation was the character of me rather than me, how many sold-out theaters I've sat in across a lifetime of performances, meeting performances, without anyone in the room quite reaching anyone else. The observer self stepping forward, not to end the conversation, to enter it, really enter it. The costume's not discarded. That would be its own performance. The ego self now performing authenticity, but loosened, held more lightly. The character of me still present, but no longer running the show. Just a person in a room with another person. Both of us uncertain, both of us unedited, both of us, if we're honest, relieved, because the performance is exhausting. And the person beneath it has been waiting a long time to simply be here. The next time I find myself in a conversation, before the publicist opens the performance, I want to try one thing. Just arrive first. Before the monitoring begins and the stories get assembled and the highlights get selected and the character of me takes the stage, just arrive. Feel the room. See the person. Notice what's actually present before the performance decides what to make of it. Not as a technique. Not as the ego self now performing presence instead of performing confidence or charm or expertise. Just the genuine, slightly vulnerable, completely ordinary act of being here before I'm anything else. Because the person across from me, also performing, also monitoring, also waiting for the moment the performance becomes safe enough to set down, is looking for exactly what I am. Not a better performance. Contact. The white-hot honesty of the present moment between two people who have both decided, just for this conversation, that the theater can wait. The sold-out crowd of ego-selves can wait. The costumes can wait. Right now, two people, actually here, actually meeting, And the only place genuine meeting ever happens, this moment, this one, right now. If something in this episode found you somewhere you recognize, you're already awake enough to know it. And that recognition, that quiet sense of, yes, I know that place, is your observer self identifying itself, confirming that it was here the entire time, watching, waiting, ready to step forward the moment you gave it your attention. And that's not nothing. That's everything. If you want to go further, if the territory we've been exploring feels like somewhere worth spending more time, the frequency arc is where this work lives. It's a gathering place, built for those ready to raise their frequency and remember their connection to something larger than the ego-selves' daily drama. It's not a system, it's not a doctrine. It's just a space where authentic frequency does the work that argument and explanation cannot. You'll find it at the frequency arc, and I'll leave the details in the notes for this episode. And just so you know, there are more episodes in this series, each one a different drift, each one the same 3 movements, each one an ordinary moment revealing something extraordinary about the consciousness experiencing it. Come back for the next one, or find another episode that calls to you, or another podcast that calls to you. The present moment will be there when you arrive. It always is.